Welcome to the Compact Podcast and Merry Christmas. Today we're going to be discussing CNN's embarrassment over a video of a Syrian captive being released, the ongoing war over and on Christmas, and, of course, Christmas movies. What counts and what doesn't. I'm joined by Geoff Shullenberger and Ashley Frawley, and we will have a special cameo appearance of this podcast's producer and Compact editorial fellow, Stephen Adubato. And I'm Matthew Schmitz. So 6 days ago, CNN put out a video showing its chief international correspondent, Clarissa Ward, discovering in a Syrian jail that had been emptied for multiple days, one locked cell, and in it, a seeming figure huddled under a blanket. And when they came up and disturbed this object, a man emerged, praising God and showing amazement as he saw the light again for the first time after, as he claimed, 3 months. It later emerged, and CNN itself reported that this man was an intelligence officer of the Syrian Air Force, known for taking bribes, and that he had, and other sources reported that he may have been imprisoned for about a month over disputes regarding how his graft was to be distributed among other regime officials. Who here saw this video, and what did you guys make of it? I mean, it's kind of strange and extraordinary moment, I think, but what did you all think?
I mean, I didn't see it when it initially made the rounds. I saw it after everyone was saying, oh, perfectly manicured nails, and this has been a prisoner for all this time. How odd. And then the accusations that CNN staged the whole thing. But it's just interesting that there's such a desperate desire to construct this everything is fine now narrative around things that they sort of put their critical thinking faculties on a shelf, apparently. But I just another sign that, I don't know, this poorly constructed media narrative of these rebels that are coming to save everyone and everything's fine now. Don't worry, they'll be good with minorities. And it's just really shambolic.
Yeah, the thing that really struck me was that almost as soon as this video came out, there were these kind of random and often annoying accounts on Twitter saying, look, this is clearly fake. It's obviously staged. Now, I ventured no opinion because I didn't have any idea whether it was staged or not. And I don't maintain now that it was, but I didn't know who this man might be. I know next to nothing about Syria. But what seems extraordinary now is that these accounts apparently had better news sense and BS detectors than the news team at CNN. And that seems to really be a black mark for what's supposed to be an authoritative news organization, one that's already, I think, thoroughly discredited among many sectors of the American population when it comes to domestic politics, but perhaps still commanded a certain respect when it came to foreign policy, whereas we've always been told, disagreement is supposed to end. Disagreement ends at the where the water begins. It's this kind of old American idea that foreign policy it's something that Americans can't disagree on, and all the people who deal with it are highly respectable and never to be doubted.
I find myself going back to both the Gulf War and the Iraq invasion, and this general narrative that, in both instances, this kind of narrative of liberation that was promulgated heavily by outlets including CNN. And, that the most famous sort of staged event that was heavily discussed around the Iraq invasion was the toppling of the statue, where if people recall, the statue of Saddam Hussein in Baghdad. As I recall, roughly what happened was the U.S. military was involved in. I mean, which isn't to say that, of course, many people were celebrating, Saddam's downfall and so on, but nonetheless, the U.S. military was involved in the process of toppling the statue. But then it was presented by the media as a kind of spontaneous act on the part of a sort of mob of jubilant Iraqis, celebrating the demise. And then it was heavily discussed as kind of a stage managed, kind of choreographed, propaganda show that was put on for the purpose of being caught, captured by the cameras of outlets like CNN. And so here again, I think you have, even though that particular military action went down in notoriety in the end, and that was part of why the U.S. was much more reluctant to get as heavily involved in Syria, 10 or so years ago, and Obama famously refused to or declined to enforce his own so-called red line. Nonetheless, there is an attempt. You can sort of see this attempt here to resurrect these narratives of liberation. The other one that sort of, the most kind of horrifying one was time that this narrative was repeated was in Libya, where you had this infamous case of Hillary Clinton sort of smirking over the horrific killing of Gaddafi, and saying, what was it? We came, we saw, he died, or something like that. And so, it is weird to just see, that it has to do with the function of CNN as a propaganda, a kind of quasi-state propaganda organ, that has been tasked for decades with kind of, helping fashion and promulgate these narratives. We could get into, Baudrillard's The Gulf War did not take place thesis, but I won't, because I'd probably talk about it for too long. But
admirable
yes.
restraint from noted theory cell Geoff
The basic
Shullenberger.
idea here is that you have a kind of standard set of narrative tropes that have accompanied these various military interventions, and this was sort of an attempt to, it seems, part of why I think it set off people's alarm bells was it just sort of, it seemed to fit into this, kind of standard type of propagandistic narrative that we've seen over the decades, and that, in many cases has been sort of debunked in the past. And, I think it perhaps speaks to CNN's, increasing inability to serve the function that it has been assigned to perform, that this particular effort seems to have culminated in such a debacle. And so it is an interesting moment just for the media, but yeah.
So let me just kind of sharpen that, Geoff, or kind of push you on it. So is the issue that CNN has lost its credibility, which seems to be what most critics are claiming, that somehow the mainstream news is broken, or is there a deeper problem? You describe CNN as serving in some ways as a propaganda arm for U.S. military might. So is it the propaganda that has lost its persuasiveness, or is it somehow the product that is being sold, the projection of American military power that has just become harder to present in these fairy tale terms? Which is it? Is it the salesmanship or the underlying
I would say
item being
the
sold?
two are probably difficult to separate entirely, but that there are sort of two things going on here. One is just the kind of narrative shaping function of an outlet like CNN has been weakened because of the sort of dilution of narrative and fragmentation of the kind of means of production of narrative, perhaps, which is why you can have this this sort of instant critical reaction to this. And we could think of many other examples of this where you have people, just kind of average civilians, being able to kind of debunk or call into question media narratives pretty much instantaneously. But I think part of that is just it does speak to the inability of in a sense, the state to rely on the same, and the American state in particular, to kind of rely on the same kind of world shaping mediatic technologies and techniques that it was once able to rely on. And that I'd say sort of the original Gulf War was the culmination of this, right? I mean, I remember sort of being a kid and the kind of dazzling spectacle of the of the war as it was. This is before I encountered Baudrillard, but just just the dazzling spectacle of the war on television. That will always stick with me because it was a formative moment. And so I think this is I suppose an evasion of your question, but it happens that was also the high point of sort of the American assertion of unipolar global hegemony. And so in a sense, those two things seem to have gone together and then have sort of entered into crisis together. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not as much of a I think fundamentally, just materially and in terms of pure firepower, I'm less of a sort of multipolar or like prophet of multipolarity than some, including some contributors to our pages. But I still think the U.S. empire is far stronger than any of its competitors, and on various levels, despite its evident weaknesses. But but I'd say one of the more notable weaknesses is the sort of decline of the ability to compellingly control narratives, right? And that this particular story, I think, took relatively little time to be deconstructed, and there is just this kind of deconstructive tendency built into the media system that has now emerged, which works against that kind of projection of dominance through propaganda. And so so I'd say that's maybe one of the bigger weaknesses of the global American empire, even though I'm not, I think the current situation in the Middle East suggests that, the American empire is stronger than many believed it was a year ago, overall, in part because of the evident weaknesses of its major competitors and challengers.
So maybe a bit like the failing New York Times, which is actually quite profitable.
Yeah.
Whatever its missteps.
Well, that's really interesting because their ability to control the narrative surrounding what they do is seriously waning. And those in power are kind of freaking out about that. Hence all of the desperate scrambling for legislation that makes it sound nice, but is essentially, disinformation and all of that is essentially trying to hold on to their control of narratives. But I wonder if if there will come a moment where they realize that perhaps they can just do what they want in the absence of a controlled narrative. Maybe like the fact that there isn't one single story and there's 1,000 different conspiracy theories and but no organized response. Maybe that they will find is to their advantage. I don't know. I'm just thinking on the spot, but it's interesting that we had this, we could have had this conversation in 2003, that it would have been just an obvious thing to say, oh, look, here it is. Here's the media trying to create a vision, a picture for all of us. And us good critical thinkers, we should question the mainstream media. And now it's like we're all in disarray because anybody who back in 2003 was saying the mainstream media, questioning the mainstream media is a core aspect of being a critical thinker, now thinks we must follow the mainstream media because they are the trusted news source. And then something like this happens and it's like whistle and look the opposite direction. It's just, I think like something is happening where the ability to control the justification for what you're doing is waning. But in the absence of anything, any kind of, what it's waning in the face of is a fragmentation of the media. A million different podcasts saying, hey, look, or a bunch of people on Twitter saying, look, the emperor's not wearing any clothes. Well, what's that really going to do? I'm not sure. This actually really worries me that I can get a little bit too optimistic perhaps about the proliferation of alternative media and how much that offers a choice, and offers a bulwark against hegemony. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it fragments our ability to resist, and those in power are just slow on the uptake, slow to realize the upper hand that they still have.
So at the beginning of this podcast, I said unembarrassedly Merry Christmas. And for that, we can thank Donald Trump, at least according to Trump himself, who said during his campaign this year that he was responsible for bringing the phrase back after a period of years when people only felt comfortable saying happy holidays. Those who recall the beginning of Trump's 2016 campaign may especially recall that Trump said frequently, we're going to say Merry Christmas again. He had a big rally in Michigan where he came out on stage backed by Christmas trees with Mannheim Steamroller playing. And this was a big theme. Obviously, it was tied in a way to his criticisms of Barack Obama as not really being a native-born American, maybe some kind of crypto-Muslim, or in any case, foreign influence who didn't fully embrace Christmas, which in this conception seems to be a holiday tied maybe not so much to the incarnation as it is to a kind of all-American sense of hearth and home, and a defined cultural center tied to the country's religious and ethnic inheritance. So Trump says he brought Merry Christmas back, and now that Trump has been reelected, it must really, really be back. I do think the wars over Christmas maybe died down a bit since 2016. I just feel that they haven't been nearly as prominent. In this campaign, Trump did warn that Harris was going to bring back the dreaded phrase Happy Holidays and once again put Merry Christmas on the back foot, but just seemed to be a little less prominent. Are the wars over Christmas over? Has Trump really scored the decisive victory he claims? And why do we keep fighting over this phrase and the holiday?
Well, it seems like there's I had a completely different understanding of it. I thought the fact that the war on Christmas had almost no footprint, or has yet to have any footprint this year, at least from my wanderings in the media, was a sign that maybe this was one that the conservatives lost. That maybe there's this. I mean, these things are cyclic, right? I mean, you can't
Could
have
be. I don't know. Not according to Trump, and he's always accurate, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I went to a I went to a conservative like Christmas gathering last week, and one of the speakers, got up on the stage and started talking about how I'm going to say Merry Christmas, and I'm just going to come out and say it. And in Sweden they can't say this. And let me tell you the story about a guy who put up a Christmas tree and it was forbidden outside of a children's daycare center. And it was just like, I could feel even the audience, which was sympathetic to this argument, was kind of like rolling their eyes like, oh, are we doing this again?
Yeah,
and
not everything has to be fed into the culture war, right? It's just becomes
but at the same
tiresome.
time, I don't know. I felt awkward. I signed off an email today to a friend of mine, and I said Merry Christmas, and I felt weird. And there was an article in the Atlantic, like at the beginning of December, I think 2nd of December, where it was titled "The Christian Case for Happy Holidays." And it was like such a post hoc justification for the fact that really people, like even Trump stores, don't say Merry Christmas. They don't mention, like his businesses don't mention Christmas. At least according to a Guardian article from a few years back. I don't know if things have changed. I did a search and I couldn't see any that had changed. And this person, it's Elizabeth Brunig. She's like, well, there are lots of holy days this time of year, and really that's the root of holidays. So it's okay that we say happy holidays. So I just think, maybe this signals a kind of exhaustion, like with that part of the culture war. Like, we just lost this one. It's happy holidays. That's it, and maybe it's like, Christians, they just want to be another victim group. They're just searching, they're scouring for some example of how they're persecuted. Oh, you can't say Merry Christmas anymore. It's like this exhaustion where the culture war has culminated in this sort of competitive victim politics. And I feel like that was the source of some of the eye rolling. Oh no, are we victimizing ourselves again? Is this what we're going to have to get behind to be like at the forefront of free thinking, which is now it's conservatives are there. Those are the ones who are thinking freely. But does that mean that we're going to go all in on victim politics?
I want to go back to
this again.
The late lamented Sohrab Ahmari's piece on how Trump won the war over normal. Because I think this is, and Sohrab is working on a book about normal, about the triumph of normal, as he calls it. And I think this is, part of what's at stake here is the question of what is normal, what is normative, and specifically this idea that there's a kind of and perhaps we'll get into this, but there's a way that Christmas is emblematic of a certain version of what is normal, and so to the extent that it is marginalized, or that the phrase Merry Christmas can become seen as somehow hostile, or an imposition on people who don't identify with it or whatever, is seen as as a shift in what is seen as normal, right? And so when it becomes abnormal or problematic to say this ostensibly previously anodyne phrase, it signals some kind of cultural shift, right? So it does just speak to this fundamental narrative of the culture war, which is, the way that certain things become redefined. And what was normal becomes abnormal. What was sort of unmarked becomes marked, to use that term. And happy holidays becomes the unmarked term, and Merry Christmas becomes the marked term. Is a shift in terms of what is normal, what is expected, what is the baseline versus what is the sort of aberration or particular thing, right? And so I don't know. I mean, I think that there's a lot to say about this. It happens that I live in a large apartment building where, currently in the lobby there is a Christmas tree, a menorah, and a Kwanzaa display. So we really have the full, I suppose the full set of holidays are represented. This is a co-op building, so it's not being imposed by some culture industry. It's, basically the elected, co-op board is, creating and putting in place this display. So, there's one level at which this is, it's reflective of a shift in, the composition of the population and who they, what this is easy to document, in terms of the sort of shifting religious composition of the population. I mean, there are various other interesting things about this. I think Matthew mentioned this, but it's fascinating the degree to which, like, the imagery of the sort of commercialized American Christmas of the 20th century a few things to say about it. One is, that narratives, classics like White Christmas were written by Jewish songwriters. So that's kind of one interesting way that even the Merry Christmas, the Merry Christmas version of Normal, right, which is sort of the mid-century Norman Rockwell vision of normality, already had this kind of complicated sort of cultural heritage behind it.
Yeah, no, I'll just mention parenthetically, Jeff, on that. When Irving Berlin was asked, "How can you, as a Jew, write a song like White
Right.
Christmas?" and he said,
And
"I wrote it as an American." And so that was a kind of term. It was a non-religious identity that was fully his, and he was able to embrace uncomplicatedly. But it also was associated with Christmas as a normative holiday, and that Rockwell kind of career. And
yeah, exactly. And so I think that
at that time,
again, speaks to this narrative of shifting understandings of normal, right? That there was a kind of normal, or there was a kind of Christmas as normal that had a certain kind of inclusiveness and multicultural capaciousness to it, and that was partly tied to the secularization of the iconography and sort of narrative content around it, which is also tied to commercialization and the way that Christmas becomes a sort of central event for the cycles of consumer capitalism, right, in the mid 20th century. And so, it's a very fascinating process. This is a cliched point to make, but people often note that, of course, like the actual founders of the original sort of Christian city on a hill, America, detested and thought it was idolatrous to celebrate Christmas in the way that they're sort of the despised sort of decadent Anglican, sort of Catholicizing Anglicans of England did, right? They ostensibly insisted that people work on Christmas, like this idea of this concept of a holiday would have been quite abhorrent to them. And so then the sort of shifting, and then the version of Christmas that we inherit is in part a sort of Victorian invention. We published a piece a year ago by Peter Hitchens about Dickens as a Christmas Carol, which is a central, sort of event in shaping the holiday as it comes into being in the Victorian age, and much of the symbolism and iconography of it that we still inherit from that, but then kind of filtered through this mid-century American version, which we can perhaps talk about in terms of film in part. And so, yeah, I think it makes sense that it is such a central culture war flashpoint, or has been. I do think it has kind of died down to some extent, but it does just define in various ways like where the center of gravity of culture is, and what's defined as normal. And so it makes complete sense on that level. And again, I don't want to jump the gun, but there's plenty to say about the role of film and entertainment in this as well. So we'll get to that later in this discussion.
That's such a shame, because that kind of this idea that a Jewish person can write a Christmas song and say, well, I wrote it as an American, really testifies to this, the powerful, what capitalism once had, which seems to be dying, which is the universalizing force of capitalism, of consumerism, that Jewish, Christian, whatever, we can all take part in this orgy of consumerism, or that we ought to be able to do that. And then it seems to go in with this whole backward trajectory of this fragmentation, of this loss of universalism, that you take something that is so secularized, that has become so secularized, and attempt to exclude, fragment. But then again, I don't know, maybe like Happy Holidays, as the Atlantic article says, is about embracing this universalism, that it's like, a lot of Americans, they celebrate both a secular tradition and a religious tradition, or many religious traditions, depending on who they're friends with or who their family is. I don't know, perhaps maybe it's not as dreary as I'm making it out to be.
And with that, we'll bring in our producer and editorial fellow, Stephen Adubato. And we're going to just kind of talk a little bit about Christmas films. What are the great ones, and what even makes a Christmas film? I mean, maybe the most central, of course, is Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, starring Jimmy Stewart, a film that taught us that every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. It's kind of the American Christmas Carol, the story of a man who's visited by a future confronted with his choices, and learns the value of community and Christmas, the Christmas spirit of generosity and love. Great movie. It's a great movie. But what are some others? What are the peaks for you all?
Well, I personally love me a really bad Hallmark Christmas movie. I absolutely, because at Christmas I want to shut my brain off completely. I do not want to be thinking at all. And you can just put your brain on a shelf and just
So,
sit there
is there a
drooling
kind
out
of
the side of your
typical
mouth.
Hallmark movie plot, or what would be a typical one?
Oh,
Least?
well, of course, it's the big city lady who goes back home and finds her ex-boyfriend who's running the pumpkin patch that belonged to his grandfather, that she needs to give up her job in the city to save the pumpkin patch. Never mind the fact that, like, he could easily just go follow her because she's making way more money. But no. It's got to follow the formula. She has to give it all up. And it's just sort of this fantasy of, like, going back to a simpler time and all this crap. And you can't have it in the real world, and you probably shouldn't want it. And so you live it out through this really stupid story of somebody who's totally uncomplicated and falls in love in totally uncomplicated circumstances. And you just sit there drooling, feel good. But I feel like there's a line, like, if you're going to make a bad Christmas movie, you need to be a little self-aware and revel in the badness, like you still, there's a fine line between a bad movie and a movie that insults you, like a movie that's like, you idiots, you dumb women, you don't care about a plot, screw you, here's your stupid ass movie. And you're like, how dare you? But then there's a movie, like, I really love the new Lindsay Lohan one, which I fully just watched to observe the glory that was her plastic surgery, just like voyeurism. Anyways, that's a great stupid movie because it holds together. It doesn't stretch. It doesn't wallow too much in cliche. It's
And
totally
Ashley, what's
dumb
the
and
movie called?
shameless.
What's the
Oh
movie
God,
called?
I can't remember it. And I was like, I
Okay,
wrote down all my
that's fine.
points.
That's fine.
I wrote down all my points, and I was like, oh, I'll remember that, and I've forgotten it.
Just Google new Lindsay Lohan movie,
Yeah.
listeners, and you'll find it.
Can I just jump in and say I find it shocking that Lindsay Lohan did a Hallmark Christmas movie after her conversion to Islam. I think that's a little.
Which is Muslim? Okay.
Well, she converted, quote unquote, a few years ago. But
All right.
I guess like White Christmas. It's an American phenomenon. So even if she's Muslim, it still works. But I have to say, I prefer the Hallmark movies with the. I think they have an alternative formula where it's like the woman who's a nanny in an imaginary European country, and she falls.
Oh yeah.
That one's a little bit more, a little spicier, a little more exciting.
That's if you live in a small town already and you have the fantasy of going elsewhere. So they got something for everyone.
That's great. So, Stephen, how about you? What's your kind of go-to in a Christmas movie?
This one it's embarrassing, but I'll be honest. I do watch Love Actually every Christmas Eve. Because it goes against everything I stand for. It's a very sentimentalized, secularized rendering of Christmas that, the point of Christmas is love and family and romance. But you can't deny that it's very well executed. It's all these little subplots and how they all intersect. There's something compelling about it as much as it's corny. I can't help but watch it every year. But I want to go back to It's a Wonderful Life because I got in trouble for writing a hot take about it, I think like 2 years ago. I mean, ultimately, it's a classic. I can't deny the fact that it's a very well done movie. Frank Capra's a genius. But when I used to teach high school in Jersey, we would show it every year before we went on Christmas break. And I mean, the kids would like roll their eyes. They're like, "Ah, it's this old black and white movie." But there was one kid who was like, "This movie is just total BS," because they're saying the point of life is just, be a good person and rely on your family and friends and everything will be fine. And like, that's not how the world works. And I realized like in a time past where, I don't know, like communities were actually cohesive and there was like at least some sense of like, religiosity as a unitive force in society. Yeah, like the message is substantial. Like it actually means something. But today, I think where that's less of a reality, that the community is going to come together and that like, they share this faith in something transcendent. I think it does come across as like very unconvincing and sentimental. Like, just because George Bailey, he relies on his family and his friends, everything's going to turn out fine in the end. I don't know. I mean, how realistic is that at this point? But also, I mean, as a very proud Italian American, I do think there's like this kind of assimilationist agenda in the film, because like you even have that one scene with like the super Italian family who's trying to make it is assimilated Americans living the dream. And I feel like Capra's trying to like nudge the super off the boat Italians towards that direction, which I have a very strong problem with. But I don't know. It's always going to be a classic. I can't hate on it too much.
Yeah, there is this kind of element in the film of kind of opposition to kind of a certain form of community that's perceived as too ramshackle or un-American or dangerous. You kind of George Bailey has this interesting kind of redeveloping these slummy parts.
Well, it's just one remark about It's a Wonderful Life, which again I haven't seen for a while. I'm kind of somewhat motivated to return to it in light of this discussion, but it is notable that it was released in 1946, so it's an immediate post-war film, and it involves a homecoming from the Second World War, and yeah, it's set on Christmas Eve, 1945, so it really is about the moment immediately after World War II, which is such a pivotal one for American history, and it's about, in a sense, the coalescence of a post-war order. And that order involved various things like, and, going to what Stephen said, the sort of sacrifice of strong ethnic identities, a certain kind of Americanization, which we could associate again with Irving Berlin's, kind of understanding of Christmas as fundamentally an American holiday rather than a religious one. And the film also does speak to the kind of tensions about what the post-war order was going to look like. It's been a while as well, but my friend and sometime Compact contributor Sam Biagetti has a podcast episode from several years ago where he really goes in depth in a sort of analysis of the film and the way that it brings out these kind of tensions and conflicts over what America is going to look like in the post-war order. It's very much part of this kind of, commercialization of Christmas. It becomes part of the kind of Christmas industrial complex. But at the same time, it's a film that's kind of uneasy with the implications of the kind of commercialization of American society. It has certain kind of assimilationist dimensions to its message, but it also is kind of uneasy about the undoing of sort of Gemeinschaft, through this kind of commercial capitalist civilization. So, I mean, and again, I do want to go back to it because it's been a few years, but it is a rich film, and it's on Sam's podcast called Historiansplaining, and he just really goes into it, particularly in the historical context of post-war America and its significance and the various themes that it brings out. So, yeah, I highly recommend that. And beyond that, I don't know if we want to open it out to other films, but I was just going to mention, being of a dark turn of mind, I tend to find my favorite Christmas films are the more disturbing ones. One of which would be Rosemary's Baby, another of which would be Eyes Wide Shut. So, which
Yeah, so I didn't even recall that Rosemary's
Yes.
Baby was set at
Yes.
Christmas time. I guess
and so-
I haven't seen it in a while.
yes.
Obviously, it's about a birth and the expectation around that. So there's a certain thematic appropriateness.
Well,
but is that
it's a
really
good
enough to
question. I
qualify it as
brought
a
it. I
Christmas
brought it up to be
film?
slightly controversial. I mean, it does certainly have Christmas imagery in the background. The kind of iconic scenes of New York City at Christmas are, form the backdrop of part of the film. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's maybe a stretch, but I would count it in that canon. And I was just going to say something about both these films is that they both involve, something. We brought up the Christmas as the holiday of sort of home and hearth, right? And as kind of, partly being tied to ideals of domesticity.
And of natality, celebration of childbearing. And Rosemary's
Yeah.
Baby is often described as a pedophobic film. Expresses a fear of children and
Yes, absolutely.
of
And,
really of giving birth.
it's one of these horror films that's really about these kind of rite of passage type moments. And I think, but yeah, it's significant. I was just going to say in terms of this home and hearth dimension of Christmas, that I'd say both of these films are about the uncanny or the unheimlich in Freud's sense, which is kind of the inversion of home and hearth. It's the unhomely, which is somehow also the sort of depths of the homely, that there's something that there's something at the core of home and hearth that is, potentially quite terrifying and disturbing. And so both these films are, films of domesticity. Rosemary's Baby and Eyes Wide Shut, both are about couples. And interestingly, both are about couples' encounters with some kind of other order that is non-familial, some kind of other social order that is non-familial. That is sort of, in Rosemary's Baby, is sort of reproductive in an extremely disturbing way. But both of them involve encounters with these essentially secret, which is another part of the complex of meanings of unheimlich in Freud's analysis. Essentially kind of secret societies, which is related to the home and hearth theme, because the home is a closed, or is in a sense a closed but porous order. The secret society is a closed order. It's a closed human social order. And so both of them involve this kind of encounter between the domestic scene of the family and this kind of other type of social structure and order. And in both cases, it involves, sexual transgression, ritualized activities. And so I don't know. I don't want to go into it too deeply, and I'm curious what other people think. But I think these movies are both about the kind of uncanny flip side of the sort of comfortable, pleasant scenes of home and hearth. That if you dig too deep into that, some extremely chilling implications might start to at least threaten to emerge.
What I really want to do is kind of launch into a Zizek impersonation and say, but neither film is as obscene, as disturbing as White Christmas, the most foul. Anyway, but I won't.
But what I would say, I mean, it's interesting that there are so many films that straddle the divide between like dark and Christmas themes, so like horror, but also the joy of Christmas. And a part of me thinks this is probably studio executives hoping that you'll keep going to the theater past Halloween, you know. So it's like we'll release this close to Halloween, right? Get you in the spooky spirit, but also it passes. There's not much of a Halloween season, so you need to keep going to the theater up until Christmas because look, there's Christmas decorations. But probably there's a deeper part of this that's cultural, in that the lead up to Christmas is also the lead up to the darkest day of the year, and that there's this kind of in between Halloween and Christmas is this kind of liminal stage of darkness. And then you have like a festival of light that sheds light on everything. So I mean, I don't know how common that is, but when I think about some of my favorite, you know, well, I can't watch horror because I'm a wuss, but you think about like Gremlins and that sort of thing. They really kind of revel in this sort of darkness, and at the same time as there's like a Christmas theme that goes on throughout the movie. And it probably has something to do with that there is just this long-standing cultural sense of the liminal, the dangerous and the dark in the lead up to the darkest day of the year. So that makes Rosemary's Baby, by the way, a quintessential Christmas movie.
Well, I think that's perceptive, Ashley, and I mean, the ghost story itself has a long-standing association with Christmas. M.R. James, generally considered the canonical writer of ghost stories, who's a professor at King's College, Cambridge, would write them and recite them to his friends every Christmas Eve, and this was part of a long-standing tradition of the so-called Christmas crawler, a kind of chilling tale to tell right before Christmas. Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was published as a Christmas crawler. It was a scary tale to tell before Christmas. And of course, the most famous is A Christmas Carol. And then It's a Wonderful Life continues that kind of ghost story dimension. So, you know, the ghost story is distinct from horror, but I think, yeah, it makes sense that some of these scarier, spookier, more disturbing stories would emerge right next to this, you know, celebration of home and the familiar during the darkest time of the year. I'm sure a lot's been written about this, and I know very little about it, but there really is a long-standing association between the holiday and these chilling things.
Another cringe take, another cringe admission actually, is that I usually watch the Harry Potter marathon on ABC Family on Christmas Eve. But there's something to the fact that like they know people want to watch Harry Potter on Christmas Eve because, I mean, to speak to this point about enchantment and this sense that even if, I mean, Christmas is not lived as like an explicitly religious holiday, there is this sense that there's the other world that you're entering into. You know, even if Harry Potter is, you know, a bastion of witchcraft and all kinds of dark magic, which I don't believe it is. But still, I mean, there's something about you're in this enchanted world, this mystical kind of other side that, I don't know, it kind of aligns with what's become of the Christmas spirit in a way.
That, and there's just like tons of wonderful dreamlike consumption, like going to like shops that, you know, are like otherworldly in their ability, in the candy that they have and that sort of thing. It's like Christmas consumerism to the, and not that that's a bad thing. I'm a big fan of consumerism, and I think that's like the smartest aspect of those books is like how much they play into like the 21st century. Well, I guess it was late 20th century child's imagination.
But I also think there's this one scene, I think in the second to last film where, I mean, so like there's always a Christmas scene in every film, but in the second to last one, when Harry and Hermione go to Godric's Hollow to like, they're trying to find this woman who wrote a biography about Dumbledore, and they hear singing from a church in the background, and she's like, Harry, it's Christmas. This is the only time like actual religion shows up in any of the movies. So I don't know. It's kind of an interesting point.
Well, with that, thanks to Ashley and Geoff. especially to Stephen, not just for the excellent editing he always does, but for his contributions to this podcast. And thank you, listeners. Go to compactmag.com/subscribe, and Merry Christmas.